Darkmoon by K.A. Converted to audiobook by ARandomAudiobookAppeared. Category: Dungeons and Dragons. Genre: Adventure. Words: 99,881. Rating: T. Status: Complete. Summary: a group of 10 racially diverse warriors join forces to take down an evil priest and his vile Waterdeep temple. Complete AD&D novel. Prologue. Within the assembly hall of the Waterdeep, an important meeting was taking place. A group of warriors was to be chosen to lead an attack on the city's most potential threat. Temple Darkmoon, under the lordship of High Priest Dran Dragor, was being blamed for several disappearances. The temple was the current word on the lips of most every resident within the Waterdeep. Calvin Blackstaff, the city's archmage, deduced that the temple was a great source of evil. Therefore, the temple had to be destroyed. Calvin discussed the project with the lords of the Waterdeep, and it was a unanimous decision that Temple Darkmoon was to fall as soon as possible. Sending an army would prove useless and would botch the whole affair. There would have to be a group of people chosen to infiltrate and nullify the temple from within its own ranks. Thus the reason for that particular day's assembly. At the head of the long oak table, Calvin Blackstaff stood confidently. "Fellow lords," he began grandly, "the purpose of this gathering is to introduce the team I have chosen to send forth to Temple Darkmoon." He waited for the murmurs to cease and continued, "I have chosen 8 individuals, each of which are renowned for their abilities in their own class." The room was quiet now and Calvin had full control. "In this state of mind I will bring forth my team that you may witness the people who will save our city." He sat down and gestured to a nervous-looking man that stood beside a door at the far end of the room. The man disappeared inside the adjoining room for a few moments and then the 8 members of the newly assembled party entered the assembly hall. The lords whispered and pointed to certain individuals and then Calvin silenced them all with his next words. "I'm sure you've all seen some of these people within the Waterdeep in the past few weeks. That's because they've been receiving instructions as well as executing some last-minute training." He explained it all rather haughtily but no lord bothered to comment, "So, I will present them to you all for those of you who cannot associate the faces with the names." He cleared his throat and rubbed his black beard as all the lords turned to examine the 8 warriors. "The leaders of the team come from Mithranor. We were very pleased when they accepted the assignment. Fighters from there possess a very good reputation," Calvin said, and 2 females stepped forward, pushing and shoving. The 2 women smiled and looked as though they were on the verge of bursting out in sobs of laughter. Both were armed and seemed fidgety. Calvin waited as the lords stared and inspected the 2 ladies with their hawk-like glances, and then spoke. "This is Elixia," he said, and the woman on the left nodded curtly. "And this is Meeks," he continued, and the woman on the right waved and chuckled. The lords quieted and seemed overall pleased with the leaders. They were both of medium height and of strong build. One carried a jeweled sword and the other a pole arm. They seemed a little odd, but they would do. "Next we have the caretakers of the group, the clerics," Calvin said as the 2 leaders stepped aside to allow 2 others by. There was a man and a woman. They both looked incredibly serious. "This is our High Priestess Sindel," the city's archmage proclaimed, and the blonde woman decked in blue robes gave the group of lords a discriminating look before staring out the window. "And this is our High Priest Will," Calvin said a little less enthusiastically, discouraged from the dirty look the priestess had given him and his companions. The man smiled warmly and it became obvious to the lords that he was the more approachable of the 2 clerics. "We had the luck to pay a visit to the Underdark," Calvin began. "We went to both Menzoberranzan and Shednasad, the infamous drow cities that all white elven folk shun. From there, we got our mages." 2 dark elves stepped forward, a female, smiling shyly, and a male, who looked as though smiling was not his favorite thing to do. The lords whispered their comments and Calvin continued. "Prisma is from Shednasad," the female wrapped her arms around herself protectively, "and Massage is from Menzoberranzan." The male gave all the lords a cold stare. Calvin frowned at the dark elves and then said, "And last but not least, our 2 thieves." The 2 drow moved aside to reveal 2 women at the back of the group. Both looked like complete opposites. One of them was quiet and stood still, the other practically jumped up and down with excitement. "This is Izzy," Calvin said, and the jumpy one bounded forward and grinned, holding her arms out for the world to see her. "And this is Nightshade. Not only is she a thief but a mage too." The quiet woman with long black hair didn't move an inch and then suddenly turned away to look at the others of her group. The group of 8 warriors gathered again and Calvin ended the day's meeting. "And so lords, these are the individuals that have been chosen by my people to rid us of Darkmoon. They have been provided with healing salves, parchments and enough food to last them a week in case of emergency." He slipped away from the table and approached the party slowly, and headed for the 2 leaders. The two women stared at him as he approached and smiled suspiciously when he stepped before them. "I will give this to one of you." He produced a small golden coin from beneath his robes and handed it to the woman with red hair. "You must keep it safely with you at all times. I will use it to contact you telepathically," he explained as the red-haired woman, Elixia, held the coin out before her for the other woman, Meeks, to see. "And one more thing," Calvin said, and the two women barely seemed to listen. "2 nights ago I sent forth a scout, Amber. She has not yet returned and I fear for her safety. If you should see her, bring her back to me as soon as you are capable," he ordered, and he heard a derivative sneer from someone within the party. Meeks and Elixia looked up at Calvin and nodded. "Yes, sir," Elixia said shortly. Calvin returned to the table and all the lords got up. "This concludes our meeting. I hope to see you again soon with some good news on this matter," he said, and all exited the assembly hall in murmurs and whispers. End of chapter. Chapter and Chapter I. Everyone's a critic. The West Woods were calm and resembled a cat waiting to pounce. Trees towered overhead and dry leaves on the ground left a noisy legacy of those who walked the desolate paths. The woods weren't big, but they were large enough to get lost in, not to mention confusing enough too. Fewer and fewer people walked the paths every year. The West Woods had become a hands-off area for most, but for others. "I wish you all the best of luck," Calvin said lightly, although his stance revealed him eager to leave the gloomy place, "and you must remember that the city is counting on you." The group of 8 warriors were dispersed and didn't look as though they would stick together for long. Each of them was glancing about and clutching his or her belongings as though the trees themselves would steal them from their hands. Calvin paused and then cleared his throat. "If it makes all of you feel better, the weather is predicted to be pleasant for the entire day, and probably into the night also," he announced, holding up a finger. No one responded to his declaration and he folded his arms, scowling. "Just remember to keep the golden coin I gave you safely. It is of utmost importance to your quest, and to my knowledge of how you all are faring." He caught a few glances for less than the blink of an eye and began to wonder if he had done the right thing in assembling this particular group of people. But talent was talent, he told himself, and these individuals were exactly what the job required. Elixia, who had been busy fiddling with her sword and had heard nothing of what Calvin had just said, intercepted Calvin as the Archmage was turning to leave. "Hey, when do you think we'll reach the temple?" she asked, and squinted as a ray of sun that penetrated the trees above blinded her momentarily. Calvin sighed. "Oh, if you're lucky. By later tonight," he answered, and Elixia nodded. Calvin waved goodbye to the party and, as he had come to expect, received a return wave from no one except Izzy. He hurried away shaking his head. "What are you waving at?" Nightshade asked sharply as she stepped up beside Izzy and gave the girl a shove. Izzy whirled on her companion and put her hands to her hips. "Well, didn't you see? Calvin waved goodbye and none of you even bothered to wave back." She threw her thick red hair back. "I bet you guys didn't even listen to what he said either," she remarked. Nightshade opened her mouth to speak, but a voice from her right sounded first. "Get off it, Izzy. If your name's Izzy." Prisma spat, appearing beside Nightshade and sending Izzy back on her heels. "It's always the same thing he says anyway. He's been saying the same dumb things since arrived here, so we didn't listen to him, so what? Did he say anything important?" she asked and looked the thief up and down. Nightshade smiled. She had been pulled from her home to join this mission and she sincerely thought that she wouldn't get along with anyone within the group, but now things seemed to be looking up for her as she watched Prisma mouth off. Izzy batted her eyelashes and then smiled sweetly. "He said that the weather'll be nice today," she concluded, and truthfully expected a positive reaction from the two women before her. Little did she know. "Uh-huh, and you think he's as good a weatherman as he is a small talker? You must be as stupid as I've heard you to be," Prisma retorted, completely annihilating the pleasant expression on Izzy's face. Nightshade whistled and patted Prisma's back. "Good job, that was beyond burn," she praised, and the dark elven mage turned to her and smiled back. "Thank you, you know there's nothing quite like putting simple minds back into their place," she said pointedly. Nightshade burst out laughing and led Prisma away from the dumbfounded Izzy that remained rigid at her back. "You said it, sister," she cheered, and the two walked off talking rapidly about God only knows what. About 50 feet ahead of the entire group, our two leaders passed comments on everything they saw. It was their form of getting to know each other. "This forest blows," Meeks said bluntly and swung her pole arm at a fallen tree. The blade of the enormous weapon swooshed past the dry log. Elixia sniffled and looked up at the sky, without paying attention whatsoever as to where she walked. "True, I've seen much prettier woods. I really think it's the Waterdeep though. The whole city, that is. It blows," she said and looked around at the world about her. They were ahead of the group, and if they wouldn't have known there was a group behind them, they wouldn't have been able to tell it was there. They could only make out about 2 or 3 voices. When those people were speaking loud, Elixia turned to Meeks. "Do you think the crew behind us is really any good?" she asked dully, and studied Meeks' face as she thought. "I don't know." Meeks responded thoughtfully. "I've never seen any of them fight. I've only said hello once. I don't even remember most of their names." She kicked a stone and it flew off to the side. Elixia shrugged in acknowledgement. Both Meeks and Elixia had known each other before the assembling of the party. They came from Mithranor and shared the same neighborhood. Of course, they hadn't known each other personally until 2 weeks ago when Kelvin called them to his aid. The two trained together to learn to complement each other's moves and had taken to each other almost immediately. A bird chirped above and a squirrel scampered away as Meeks walked by. "You know what?" she asked Elixia. "What?" Elixia said almost inaudibly. "I can't wait to get to the temple so we can fight," Meeks confessed, letting her anxious and fidgety side come to the surface. She peered over at her friend and then, in a surge of energy, both of them raised their weapons and yelled, "Kick some cleric butt! Kick some cleric butt, my!" Sindel grumbled from behind the two childlike warriors. She was the oldest of the entire party, in her 30s and an accomplished high priestess of the Temple of Timora. She resided within the Waterdeep and was the first to have been summoned for the quest. She knew all the lords of the Waterdeep and despised each and every one of them. She blamed them for the destruction of a temple she once led. Her accusations were justified though, because the lords did bring down the temple. But not for ill purpose. Unfortunately, Sindel never chose to believe that. But hell, Sindel seemed to have a grudge against every living soul, so why not add the names of the lords of the Waterdeep to the list? The hem of Sindel's thick blue robe snagged a branch and she tore at it roughly. "Oh, for the love of God! Every time I come outside, just let go, you stupid branch. What did I ever do to you? Let go!" she shouted suddenly, and a hand gently removed the robe from the branch. She turned in a swirl of blonde hair and got ready to sneer at whoever touched her robe. "All right, who dares to touch me?" she said raspily and looked up at Will, the other cleric of the group. He stood calmly by her side and waved curtly. "Hi," he said, and Sindel drew herself up to appear imposing. Indeed she did, but Will didn't let it get to him. "I heard you mumbling. And then talking. And then swearing. And then screaming, so I decided to see what was the matter," he explained and smiled, fully expecting and awaiting Sindel's imminent, arrogant reaction. "I need help from no one, especially not clerics of some god not worth mentioning," she hissed and gave Will a long, diminutive stare. The insult affected Will a little more than he had imagined. "Fine, you insolent snake-haired wretch!" he yelled impulsively. Once again Sindel had gone too far and patient Will had not been able to hold himself back. Sindel and Will trained together as Meeks and Elixia had, but, although they made an absolutely amazing team, found it almost impossible to cooperate with each other. Will was normally a patient, pleasant person to be around and had made a huge effort to withstand Sindel's verbal torture, but sometimes she was too much for him and he lost his good sense. There were isolated times when they did work together, though. "No, of course you don't need help, you hag," Massage Hunnett purred from a safe distance behind the two clerics. "You could have unhooked that robe all by yourself, you would have torn the damn thing to bits, but hey, you would have gotten it off that branch." He tightened his hold on his spellbook and took a deep breath to calm himself. Massage had met Sindel a few days ago and she had snubbed him ever since. From that day forth both hadn't been able to come within 30 feet of each other without wanting to kill one another. "You're lucky Will can stand to be around you, that poor senseless man," Massage commented under his breath and smoothed his velvet robe. He looked behind him and saw Prisma and Nightshade talking, and trailing behind them he saw Izzy. He hurried a little more so that Izzy would not see him traveling alone and join him. He felt out of place out of the Underdark, and alone, even though Prisma, his fellow Dark Elf, was with him on this mission. Everything was so warm and alive, and the sun's rays were driving him mad. But he'd hold out. Massage squinted and looked past the two clerics that were presently ignoring each other. He could just make out the figures of Meeks and Elixia. He smiled. Those two would definitely keep him from going mad, they were so odd and energetic. Surely they would pull a chuckle from him sooner or later, but for that he would have to walk up ahead of Sindel and Will. He drew another breath and picked up the pace, coming up behind the two clerics. He fought the urge to slap Sindel on the back of the head and walked by her quickly. She uttered a loud HMPH as he walked by and he mimicked her. Loud enough for her to hear, of course. Massage grinned once he was ahead and slowed as he trailed behind the two leaders. The Westwood's paths were winding and confusing, all the trees resembled one another and no sounds could help as milestones. It was early morning and although the sun was bright, very few rays actually penetrated the thick foliage looming overhead. To the party's misfortune, all 8 members followed unconsciously the 2 people who really had no sense in direction. The 2 themselves didn't even bother to notice their inaptitude until they crossed a familiar stone for the second time.
Wait a second,
Meeks frowned and bent to pick up the small stone at her feet.
I kicked this stone a while back.
She observed the stone for no particular reason and Alexia came up beside her.
We're going in circles, Meeks,
she remarked suddenly, shocked at the words. The 2 ladies stared at each other for a moment when a smooth voice broke the silence.
Damn. How do you think this happened?
Massage asked, stepping between the 2 fighters. Both turned slowly and faced him.
Well,
he asked again. Alexia stared past Massage. The rest of the group had noticed their halt and were coming up to join them.
I don't know. It just happened. We were talking,
she explained and motioned to her companion for help. Massage raised an eyebrow.
Were you guys watching where you were going?
He tried tentatively and flinched as Sindel's voice sounded from behind him, irritating to his keen ears. Meeks planted the butt of her pole arm in the ground and looked the drow wizard in the eye.
You see? Well. No. No, we weren't,
she admitted and nodded slowly, putting on her most serious face and examining Massage's reaction. Massage continued his staring contest with Meeks and held back the words I didn't think so when Sindel came up beside him, followed by Will.
Oh, for love of God,
the High Priestess cried, throwing up her hands in defeat.
We've been walking for over a half an hour and you haven't even been watching where we were going? Neither of you,
she demanded furthermore. Will patted her shoulder.
Neither were you,
he added in, and jerked back when Sindel growled back at him. Soon Nightshade and Prisma joined the confused crew and Izzy too. The little thief tried to get a good spot within the circle but Prisma and Nightshade pushed her out simultaneously, grinning at each other. When the grumbling had died, Alexia spoke.
Okay, fine. Does anyone actually know how to travel properly? These woods aren't very big and I don't think Kelvin would be happy to know that his team of heroes got jammed in the woods,
she said harshly and looked at everyone in turn. Faces went blank, others averted their gaze and finally one pair of eyes remained.
Me,
Izzy yelped, pushing past Nightshade and Prisma and holding up her hand like a schoolgirl asking a question.
I can travel properly.
She stood proudly amidst her teammates and smiled like a jackal. Alexia shrugged at the volunteer.
All right then Izzy, the front is yours,
she declared and grabbed Meek's arm, pulling her back to let the curly-haired thief through. Izzy took a few moments and stared about her. Everyone watched as though she might turn around at any moment and declare that the whole group had wandered into oblivion. Who knows how much time Izzy would have taken if Nightshade wouldn't have walked up and pushed her forward, sending the group on its way once more.
So, don't want to travel with Izzy, hey?
Meeks asked lightly, looking up at Massage who had joined the 2 retired leaders. Massage frowned.
No,
he said shortly and hugged his spellbook to his chest. Meeks chuckled and examined a tree as she walked by it.
I don't blame you, I heard she's a big ditz and if you ask me, from what I just saw,
she stopped walking and held her hand up.
Me, I can travel properly,
she imitated in a mocking voice and continued walking.
Yep, she's a ditz,
she concluded. She looked over at Massage and the mage burst out laughing.
Oh my god, that's pretty good. That's damn good,
he exclaimed and suddenly felt less bitter than he had earlier. Meeks smiled proudly at her joke.
That's right, but I won't pick on her, I think that the job's been taken by those 2 other girls,
she said, pointing to Nightshade and Prisma who were on either side of Izzy up ahead. Alexia coughed from the dust she was kicking up and closed her blue eyes.
I'm hungry,
she said and turned to Meeks and Massage for a positive response. Meeks frowned and nodded.
Yeah, me too,
she said and Massage's jaw dropped.
What? We just had breakfast a little over an hour ago,
he commented and threw out his arms. Both warriors blinked and their weapons clanged as they brushed against each other.
Precisely,
Alexia spat, nodding her head and pushing back a lock of her long red hair. Meeks smiled her agreement and Massage shook his head disapprovingly. This would prove to be quite a trip. The small team walked the west woods for another approximately 15 minutes and Izzy found the clearing in the trees leading to the temple. Her glory was short-lived, the persistent nagging of Prisma and Nightshade wrung her spirit of whatever bit of pride it could have acquired. Sindel was anxious to get onto clerical grounds, even though they weren't of her religion, and Will always stayed close by to keep her from doing, or saying, anything irrational. Once the party was out in the open again, Alexia and Meeks regained the lead and ran ahead, screaming like barbarians. Massage pulled his cloak about his slender shoulders and hoped the mission would go well. End of chapter. Chapter and Chapter 2. Temple Darkmoon. Temple Darkmoon's titan-sized stone doors were wide open to the public, even though, by Sindal's knowledge of Waterdeep clerical affairs, hardly anyone visited this particular temple. The building itself stood imposingly atop a ground elevation that composed of a huge clearing at the far end of the west woods. A long winding dirt path led the way to the temple's entrance. Sounds were scarce, and so was life. The mismatched group arrived within the temple a little hesitantly, all except for Meeks and Elixia, that is, but aren't they always the exception? The two leaders burst into the building's richly decorated lobby and looked around at what surrounded them. There was no carpeting on the floor, and that was a good thing. Meeks and Elixia's boots were dirty and they had left a muddy mess behind them when they barged into the small haven. Directly ahead of them, there stood a closed door with the temple's insignia carved on it. On either side of the door were walls, and to their left there was a small alcove. Thick crimson banners adorned the walls and tainted windows sported the temple's insignia as the door did.
"Can we be of service?"
asked an unfamiliar voice from behind Elixia and Meeks. Both turned to face two smiling clerics, that were not Sindal, obviously, they were smiling. "And Will?" blurted Meeks as the rest of her crew entered the building. She smiled at them and she and Elixia hurried over to join them. The two smiling clerics watched the spectacle without saying a word, and then,
"Greetings. Welcome to Darkmoon,"
the female cleric said, a blonde woman that was a tad younger than Sindal but that eyed thoughtfully. The woman spoke cheerily and the 8 warriors listened, not sure what to do.
"I am Nadia and this is my,
she paused for a noticeable split second.
"brother Jorel,"
she exclaimed, putting emphasis on the word brother. She made the mistake of making eye contact with Sindal and the older priestess gave her one of her patented "you suck" looks. The male cleric, Jorel, took over for his sister.
"You must be weary from your journey, stay and rest. We will watch over you,"
he said smoothly and flashed the party a wholesome smile. That was not, Prisma remarked, reflected in his opaque brown eyes.
"Thank you, we will take our time,"
Will answered quickly, elbowing Sindal roughly as she opened her mouth to say something useless. The group walked over to the little alcove to their left and the two helpful clerics retreated outside the temple doorway to talk. Nightshade plopped down beside Prisma.
"Weary? We're not weary. What are we doing here? Why don't we just kill them both and get on with it?"
she whispered quickly to whoever wanted to hear. Prisma cocked her head to the side.
"Yeah, the man's eyes were not sincere. If his sister hasn't raised enough suspicion yet,"
she added to her friend's protest. She brought her knees up against her chest and leaned her chin on her knees. Will and Sindal, who had joined the two women in the alcove, paced back and forth.
"We want to get beyond that door,"
Will remarked, pointing to the door bearing the temple's insignia. Meeks and Elixia had wandered to the opposite end of the lobby and were giggling about an odd carving on the wall of 4 clouds blowing in the wind.
"We're going to have to get around the 2 clerics, but I don't know if killing them is the right thing to do,"
Will finished and leaned against the wall.
"What do you mean?"
Nightshade asked from the floor. Will frowned.
"Well, perhaps we could get around them. They're outside, are they not?"
he commented, trying his best to hatch a plan. The High Priest's answer did not traverse Nightshade's head.
"So? Why can't we just kill them?"
she asked again, holding up her short sword before her eyes and watching the gleam of the blade as the sun's rays penetrating the stained glass caressed its sleek surface. Will sighed hopelessly.
"Sindal, why don't you explain? I don't want to end up doing all the talking,"
he said sharply and caught the other cleric's shoulders. She roughly pulled herself from his grasp and blinked.
"Then perhaps you should start doing the thinking."
She snapped at Will viciously, and turned her back to him to avoid his response.
"You see, Nightshade, Will's a pussy and we will kill the 2 clerics. Don't you worry,"
she said sweetly, and both Nightshade and Prisma smiled widely.
"This carving blows,"
Meeks said as she touched the stone cloud carving. The thing was bigger than she and covered a good part of the wall before her.
"Everything blows for you, doesn't it?"
Elixia remarked, nudging Meeks and running the blade of her sword along the grooves in the stone. Meeks nodded and flung back her black ponytail.
"Yep. No doubt about it. But I mean this carving blows literally, look at the clouds, they're blowing,"
she said in response. The two could hear a heated conversation going on the other side of the room and didn't care to join in. No one shared their views anyway. Elixia flung herself suddenly away from the wall and pointed her sword at Meeks.
"No. No. Not everything blows for you, that's not true,"
she said loudly and then bent close and spoke in a raspy whisper.
"There are some good things,"
she said and then waved her sword emphatically. Meeks leaned on her polearm and put her hand to her hip.
"Like?"
she asked skeptically. Elixia squealed excitedly and giggled. She spun around and pointed at Massage with her sword. The dark wizard was staring at one of the thick tapestries on the left side of the closed door. Izzy was there too and was talking excitedly, and Massage seemed to be trying to get away from her. Meeks grimaced.
"What?"
She cried out loud and then sank back against the wall before the two temple clerics came inside and told her she was being loud and obnoxious, like so many people had over the years. Alexia smiled smugly at her pal.
I saw the way he laughed at your Izzy joke back in the woods.
She purred and watched Meek's jaw drop.
Alexia.
Meeks whispered harshly and shoved her hard enough to throw her a little off balance.
You laugh at my jokes, and so does Prisma and Nightshade, and Will and Sin.
She stopped short.
Well, not so much Sindel. But you know what I'm trying to say.
She peered over Alexia's shoulder at Massage and averted her gaze when he turned to see what all the commotion was about.
It was the first time he had ever heard one of my jokes, so he thinks I'm funny. So what? So does everyone else.
She protested and wedged her pole arm between her and Alexia. The red-headed warrior threw up her hands in defeat.
All right, okay, settle down there, Meeks.
Geez, she attempted to put on a straight face and Meeks bought it.
But I still think he likes you.
She cried overly loud and propelled herself away from the now enraged Meeks, who came running at her. Meeks threw herself at Alexia and both of them fell to the ground, their weapons flying over the stone floor in a loud screech. They tumbled and tore at each other and the two temple clerics peered inside to see what was happening. Alexia waved at them and they waved back with confused expressions on their faces and looked away. Massage and Izzy overheard Alexia's last few words, as the rest of the temple had, and had turned just in time to see the two hit the floor and begin to fight. Massage, though, watched in curiosity as he noticed that both women were smiling. Could they just be fooling around like young animals? He leaned back against the wall and crossed his arms over his chest, so maybe he'd be getting the laugh he had bargained for after all. Prisma watched Meeks and Alexia in amazement and pointed.
Look, they're fighting.
She uttered, and Nightshade, Will and Sindel paused their argument to look at the two leaders. They were still tumbling and tearing, but they were laughing too. Massage and Izzy watched the spectacle from the closed door.
Look at them go.
Nightshade cheered and grinned. Sindel shook her head.
And they are our leaders?
She asked pointlessly and looked over at Will for a rational thought pattern. Will looked at Sindel, then at the two on the floor.
Give them a chance, let them be,
he said and patted Sindel's shoulder. She grumbled as the two fighters rolled away from each other and held their stomachs as they burst into hysterical fits of laughter.
Oh, help me,
Sindel said and looked up at the ceiling. Besides Sindel, Will began to worry that the two fighters were causing too much commotion and that the temple clerics might throw them out. He stalked out into the center of the lobby and literally pulled Meeks and Alexia back to the alcove where Nightshade and Prisma snickered. Massage followed, and Izzy bolted to catch up with him. He jumped back in surprise and grimaced when she caught up with him.
You suck, Izzy,
cried Prisma from the floor, just loud enough for the dainty thief to hear. Unfortunately, Izzy pretended to not hear. When everyone was gathered, Sindel spoke up.
We've decided that we're not going to kill the two temple clerics.
She shot a devious stare in Will's general direction.
And that we're just going to go around them.
She looked into the 7 pairs of eyes watching her and registered in awe the different expressions. Outside, Nadia and Jorel's voice could be heard. They spoke in hushed tones and once in a while you could hear one of them chuckle.
How do we go around them? They're right there,
Alexia asked, motioning to the temple's exit. She had miraculously gotten over her mood to laugh but continued to smile mischievously at Meeks whenever she could. Will coughed and crouched down near Izzy, who was, unbelievably, sitting directly beside Nightshade and Prisma.
We're going to lock them outside, of course. Killing them would probably set off some sort of alarm and we'd definitely be caught right here. I don't know if there are any entrances anywhere else around the temple, but it doesn't really matter. They'll eventually get back inside, but we'll be long gone by then. They'll suspect something went wrong. But they also might think it was a mistake on our part.
He explained slowly to everyone as much as to Alexia. Most everyone nodded their approval and soon all were on their feet and ready to begin putting the plan into action. Everyone tried to be as quiet as possible and it almost worked except for 2 giggles. A loud bang. Izzy had tried to get up. Nightshade and Prisma had pushed her back down as soon as she had gotten to her feet. Simple Izzy smiled and got up gingerly once the 2 bullies had moved ahead. The group of 8 stood in the center of the lobby and stared outside the open door where the 2 temple clerics' robes were the only thing visible. All of them waited. And waited.
Well, someone has to go shut the door,
Massage whispered and held back a chuckle. There was a stir in the assembly and then Meeks stepped into the open.
I'll do it,
she declared and walked off, slowly towards the exit. She smiled as the thought crossed her mind that this might just be the hardest thing she was going to have to do in her whole life. It was hell to be quiet. She reached her destination and felt her friend's eyes on her back. She swallowed and looked about the doorway for a handle or switch that would close the heavy stone door. She frowned. There was no such handle or switch. Turning around slowly, Meeks shrugged and mouthed the words, "No way," to shut the door, and made the hand movements to go with it. Looks of desperation painted the expecting faces of her 8 comrades, and then suddenly all of their eyes went round and Nightshade pointed at the door. Meeks spun around and the 2 clerics appeared in the doorway with confused expressions. "What?" they began, and Meeks jumped from the shock and stress of the moment. She cried out and heard the sound of weapons being pulled from their sheaths behind her. She panicked and swung her pole arm in a wide arc, slicing the female cleric's thick robes. The clerics seemed as panic-stricken as Meeks, and they looked to be trying to do something that wasn't very evident. There was a shout from behind Meeks, and just as a lightning bolt thundered by her side, the great door before her slammed shut with amazing speed. She threw herself to the ground as the spell erupted on the stone door and felt the sting of its remnants on her bare shoulders. Shadows gathered around her as she felt a hand on her shoulder.
"Are you all right?"
Alexia's voice asked brightly as Meeks was pulled to her feet. Meeks opened her eyes and brushed herself off.
"Yeah, I'm okay." "What the hell was that?"
she asked, and the party turned to look at Massage, who bared an apologetic expression.
"I'm sorry, Meeks, I wasn't aiming for you or anything."
"Really?" he stuttered and smiled weakly. Meeks shook her head and coughed.
"Whatever, just not so close next time. You could have seared my side,"
she said, and clutched herself simultaneously. The dark wizard nodded, blushed and slipped behind Prisma, who was holding back a fit of giggles.
"What of the door?"
Sindel cried all of a sudden, turning everyone's attention back to the matter at hand. Alexia strode past Meeks and patted the door, then pushed it with her shoulder.
"It's lodged. I don't know how, but it's shut and it ain't coming open anytime soon,"
she deduced, and walked back to the rest of the group. There was a short silence, and Will said,
"That was what those 2 clerics were looking all panicky about. They shut the door on us from the outside."
His brow furrowed and he looked over at Izzy, Nightshade, and Prisma. Nightshade and Prisma answered in unison.
"So it was magic,"
they said.
"And that means we can't open it up again."
Izzy completed the telling of the predicament with a resigned shrug that won her an angry glare from everyone in the party.
"So we're stuck,"
Massage repeated, and the small group sighed as one. Beyond the closed door that bore the insignia of Temple Darkmoon was a set of 2 staircases, one going up to the right, and one going down to the left. There were no telltale sounds from either direction, and the only hint of what might lie beyond each staircase was darkness to the left, and light to the right.
"I say left,"
Prisma declared, staring down in that direction. Massage came up beside her and nodded.
"Me too,"
he said, and turned back to hear everyone else's decisions. Izzy closed the door that led to the lobby out of precaution and looked about quickly. Will and Sindel were already atop the first stair that lead up to the right.
"Sindel and I say we go up here first, it looks more inviting."
Will opted, and watched Sindel look around paranoidly. Nightshade wasn't listening and was busy touching the walls with her fingers. She could feel tiny disturbances in the finely shaped stone that could lead to secret passageways or hideaways. Izzy had joined her and now both were busy in their work.
"I think I've found something, people,"
Nightshade said in a quiet voice. Everyone gathered around her and she stood up straight. She caressed a certain portion of the wall with her fingers and licked her lips nervously.
"The wall is offset, as odd as that may seem, and it feels rougher. It's been touched a lot. And I'm pretty sure there's a doorway here,"
she said, and pressed on the wall with her fingers to try to find a pressure point that might trigger a change in the wall.
"Alexia, Meeks, try shoving this part of the wall for me,"
Nightshade asked, and the 2 warriors eagerly threw themselves against the wall. It didn't budge.
"Is it magical in any way, Nightshade?"
Prisma inquired, coming up beside her friend and touching the wall as well. She felt nothing of what Nightshade did and stepped away confusedly. Nightshade threw back her long black hair and pressed her entire palm to the wall.
"I don't know, but maybe."
She closed her eyes and then shifted.
"Maybe. Wait a minute. Wait a minute."
She brought her palm to the exact center of the area and pressed sharply. The wall before her disappeared and was replaced by a teleportation gate. She looked back at the team and then stepped away from the twinkling, floating crystals. She could find the secret passageways but wasn't the first to try them out. Massage clapped slowly and walked up to Nightshade to pat her on the shoulder.
"Good job. Now can you tell us where it goes?"
he asked tentatively. Nightshade shook her head and backed away furthermore.
"We need someone to go in there,"
Massage said, and pushed a strand of his stark white hair from his face and tucked it behind his sharply pointed ear.
"Izzy'll do it,"
Prisma said, and shoved the girl forward.
"Isn't that right?"
she taunted, and Izzy frowned.
"I don't know, what if it's dangerous?"
Izzy whined, and Prisma leaned forward to put her dark hands on Izzy's creamy shoulders.
"Then we'll know not to go in, now won't we?"
She answered pointedly. Nightshade chuckled and immediately ceased when she caught Will and Sindle's disapproving glare.
Just go, for God's sake.
Elixir rushed and Meeks shoved Izzy inside the teleporter's shimmering light fragments. There was silence in the air and nothing could be heard from beyond the portal, not a soul knew what to think or how to feel. Prisma exhaled impatiently.
What if she's dead?
She asked, for the sake of conversation. Nightshade burst out laughing and then stopped in fear of being heard by temple clerics.
Good. She's a ditz,
she commented, but no one wanted to trash talk Izzy at the moment. First of all, she had been brave enough to go into the portal, even though she was shoved, and second of all, no one had really had the chance to talk to her except maybe Massage, who didn't really enjoy her company either. There was a hollow sound and then Izzy emerged from the teleporter sporting a dizzy expression.
It's safe. It's a clerical utility room of some sort. There's another teleporter in there that leads to another room that looks exactly like the one you first go into when you step inside.
She pointed to the portal and everyone hung on her every word, especially the clerics who had heard the words utility room.
So let's go,
Sindel said and shoved past the unstable Izzy, and disappeared into the crystals. Will was next, mumbling,
Wait, Sindel, settle down.
And then Prisma and Nightshade went in next, dragging Izzy in with them, and finally Elixir, Meeks, and Massage. The room was as large as the lobby and the teleporter brought you to the left side of the room. Ahead was a large golden cross centered on the far wall. Sindel and Will were both huddling about the large holy symbol when the rest of the group entered.
So what does it do?
Asked Massage in his calm voice. He swept past Meeks and Elixir and joined the two clerics. Nightshade and Prisma had wandered to the right side of the room and were examining the second portal that Izzy had said led to another chamber of the same style. Sindel couldn't keep her hands off the sleek, shiny surface of the golden cross.
I'm not sure, I think it might be an idol. Or something,
she said and pushed Massage away when he attempted to lean closer to take a look for himself. Izzy sat in the center of the room and clutched her head.
I'm dizzy,
she moaned and no one paid her heed.
Maybe it would help if I casted a true seeing spell,
Massage offered, leaning over a plaque on the side wall along with Elixir and Meeks. Sindel's reply was a short and sweet.
No, your petty magic is of no use to me,
she said simply and closed her eyes for concentration. Massage grimaced and pretended to kick Sindel's behind. Meeks and Elixir began to laugh and Sindel's eyes snapped open.
Shut up. I'm trying to read into this thing,
she ordered and returned to her reading. Meeks leaned against the wall and noticed that Massage leaned against something shiny.
Move, Massage. You're leaning on something,
she said and the wizard did as she bid. On the wall was a plaque. Meeks frowned at herself for not having noticed it earlier.
It says death be undone by me, but I shall only grant 3. What's that mean?
She asked whoever wanted to answer. Both Will and Sindel's heads turned and they jumped up, shoved past Elixir, Meeks, and Massage and read the plaque for themselves.
Oh. It's a resurrection tool. But we only get to resurrect 3 people,
Will exclaimed and everyone smiled.
Izzy said that there was another room like this,
Elixir commented and turned towards the little thief who still remained sitting down and clutching her head in the middle of the room.
Isn't that right, Izzy?
She asked her. Izzy closed her eyes and opened them up again.
Yes it is. It's right over there,
she said, pointing to the teleporter on the right side of the room. All at once, the small group charged forward into the designed teleporter. Izzy groaned, got up and lumbered in after them. As Izzy had said, the second room looked exactly like the first, wall arrangements, plaque, cross, and all. Nightshade and Prisma were both in the room already, sitting on the floor and talking. They had went in during the other group's little debate.
Hello people,
Nightshade said, got up and helped Prisma to her feet. The party split up and Will and Sindel both lunged for the gleaming cross. They were saying things to each other but no one could make out the words. Elixir and Meeks hung back and left the two clerics do their thing. Izzy entered and immediately crumbled to the ground. Teleporters were not her favorite mode of transportation.
This one's powers are expired,
Sindel exclaimed after a short while.
It's useless to us.
She turned and walked over to the rest of her group along with Will. Soon after, the gang was outside of the resurrection chambers and back into the halls of Darkmoon. The clerics took note to remember the little room and the others began to be anxious to get on with their quest, particularly Meeks and Elixir. Izzy was nauseous and puked before leaving the second chamber. Nightshade and Prisma did a good job in bringing up her courage to cross the two teleporters again, nothing like a little excessive force to get one back on his or her feet. End of chapter. Chapter and Chapter 3. Chapter 3. Sanral.
So, whose idea was it to come down here again?
Will asked, more than a little discouraged by the dampness and darkness of Temple Darkmoon's catacombs. After much debate on the part of Sindel and Massage about whether to go up the stairs or down the stairs, the final decision had been to go down. The new bruise on Sindel's arm said so. Arms crossed over her chest, Sindel sneered, "His." She spat, pointing at Massage. Will reached out and patted the slender wizard's shoulder.
"Well, at least I'll know who to blame if something goes wrong,"
he said, and Massage frowned, steepled his long fingers and gave Will an insolent smile. Where they were, the walls had gone from polished granite to rough and dirty building stone. The lighting was bad, the few torches that were lit only gave the area a worse look. The floor was dirty and littered with stray rocks, there was no sound except for the occasional drip of water and scuttle of a mouse across the floor. It was cooler, and everything the party did seemed to make a terrible amount of noise.
"We can go to the left or to the right, there doesn't seem to be much difference,"
Elixia commented, looking about and straining her ears to hear the slightest hint of life. Indeed, there was a door to the left as well as to the right, and both were metal, not the lovely stone that composed the doors upstairs.
"Well, we would need a key to get to the one on the left, so let's go to the right."
Meeks analyzed the situation simple-mindedly, but no one cared to go against her petty logic. The group walked over to the door and released a latch to open it. There was a hallway ahead. As the gang walked the path ahead, Prisma and Nightshade examined everything they walked by.
"These catacombs were built by Drow,"
Prisma remarked, recognizing her own people's structural mannerisms. Ahead of her, Massage nodded.
"Yes, they were. That means lots and lots of secret passageways. So it's best we don't get discouraged if it seems that we've done all we can and there's a missing link,"
he said softly, and Nightshade listened carefully. If there were secret passageways, she would be the one to find them, seeing as Izzy was more or less apt at that particular task. At the head of the 8 people, Meeks and Elixia smiled.
"At last, we get to have an adventure."
Meeks cheered. There was a door ahead and she got the feeling that the door would be guarded. Elixia spun her sword and nudged her friend.
"I know, this is going to be the most fun I'll have in long. I'm sure of it. The excitement's already building up, I don't know how much longer I can hold it back."
She piped and stopped at the closed door before her. Meeks raised her pole arm and whirled to see if the group was following.
"Go ahead and open the door, guys,"
Izzy called from the back of the line. Her following words were choked out by the hushings of Nightshade and Prisma. Will and Sindel looked to be getting ready for combat, and Massage flipped through his spell book. Will smirked.
"One of you put your ear to the door and tell us."
He began to Meeks and Elixia, but the two had already opened the door and had run inside screaming. Meeks' intuition had been correct, the door was guarded by 2 men in armor and wielding long swords. The 2 guards had heard the group from outside, and when the door had opened, they had tried to warn the new intruders not to enter, but it was already too late. Elixia and Meeks charged the 2 guards, and when the rest of the party stormed in, the high-pitched sound of steel on steel was already ringing in the air. Sindel and Prisma stole forward and casted spells simultaneously, while Will joined in with Meeks and Elixia. Nightshade stood back and so did Izzy. Massage had dropped his spell book and was too late to help. Sindel's hold spell had had effect on the guard Elixia was fighting, and Elixia finished him off quickly. Meeks yelled as Prisma's volley of magical missiles shot by her and scared her half to death. Luckily Will was there to help, and the guard was defeated without further ado. With the carnage already started, Meeks and Elixia gave each other high fives and chattered excitedly. Will went around checking if anyone was hurt. Nightshade congratulated Prisma, and Izzy watched on, all bright-eyed and peppied up. Unfortunately for Massage and Sindel.
"You are the most pathetic mage I have ever met,"
Sindel yelled, facing off with a very angry Massage.
"Get off my case, wench. I dropped my spell book. What did you expect me to do, pick it up and throw it?"
The dark elf yelled back, clenching his teeth and holding back a growl. Sindel's eyes blazed.
"It would have been better than nothing."
She shoved Massage sharply.
"Shut up."
Massage hollered and shoved Sindel back. The priestess shoved him again, and he shoved her again. Soon enough, both were swinging punches at each other and growling. The little battle attracted the attention of the whole crew, and everyone huddled around. Will angered quickly.
"Hey! Stop it, both of you!"
He scolded and tore Sindel away, holding her hands behind her back. Elixia and Meeks laughed hysterically, and Nightshade and Prisma looked on concernedly. Izzy trotted up to Massage and attempted to pull him as Will had pulled Sindel. The angry wizard gave Izzy a stare so cold that she backed away before even coming within 5 feet of him.
"Just give it up, you two,"
Prisma said lightly.
"Stop picking on him, Sindel. It's not his fault, quit thinking you're so superior,"
she said sharply, and a few members of the team squirmed, knowing Prisma was right but hoping Sindel wouldn't go nuts on them all. Will shoved Sindel ahead into the large empty room.
"Let's go, we don't have time for this type of thing,"
he said, and most of the team followed.
"Come on."
Meeks said softly and pushed Massage forward. The wizard raised an eyebrow defying Meeks to move him, and Meeks smiled and shoved him anyway. Alexia stalked past them and winked at Meeks. If Alexia didn't stop bothering her about Massage, then it would be she and Alexia swinging punches at each other in the near future. The room went into a long corridor to the right and a closed door to the left. Will and Alexia, leading now because Meeks was busy soothing Massage and Izzy was busy annoying Sindel, decided to go with the closed door. It was better to clean out all the areas they passed instead of skipping some and having to come back later. They would never know what they could have forgotten. The door was guarded as well, but the poor man was dispatched with a sweep of Alexia's blade.
It's a food storage chamber,
Alexia discerned, pushing back a lock of blood-red hair to get a better look at the room before her. It was tiny and had barrels in it. Food packages were carelessly scattered about the floor.
Food,
Meeks said dreamily, coming up behind her friend and bending over to pick up one of the rations.
We don't have time to eat right now, babe. Just keep it for later.
Nightshade called from behind Prisma. Meeks grimaced and put the food in her backpack. She turned to the rest of the crew and said,
Now let's get out of here before I go crazy.
And everyone did as she said. They went towards the corridor at the opposite end of the room and walked it without much conversation. At the end of the hallway was a door and before the door was a pressure plate. Alexia walked ahead and when she stood atop the plate, the door before her opened but when she went to walk past the door it would close.
I understand.
Nightshade said brightly, coming up in front of the party.
It's a pressure plate, it needs weight to activate the door. Put something on it,
she said. Alexia looked around and then picked up a large enough stone off the floor. She placed it on the plate and as Nightshade had predicted, the door opened.
Now go. It won't close up again, trust me.
Nightshade assured Alexia and the leader strode through the door effortlessly. A large room spread before them and Izzy frowned at the darkness. She picked a torch from its holder and held it out to her left for a better view of her surroundings.
This is creepy,
she squeaked. Prisma elbowed her in response.
I see a keyhole over there,
Massage said and pointed straight ahead. Meeks strode over to where Massage pointed and Izzy's torchlight confirmed Massage's words. Beside the keyhole was obviously a door and in plain sight, in an alcove in the wall, was the key.
I don't know,
Izzy warned.
Maybe it's a trap.
She sounded frightened but it was useless to attempt to reassure her.
You hear too many stories,
Meeks said in a husky voice and picked the key from the alcove. She inserted the key into the lock and the door creaked open. It was a jail cell and there was someone in it. Meeks and Alexia raised their weapons out of instinct but in vain.
Hello,
a small voice said timidly. The whole party gathered inside the cell to look at who they had found. It was a halfling, chained, and looking in bad shape. Alexia bent down and opened her mouth to say something when Meeks' rude words cut her off.
What do you want? Who are you?
Meeks demanded. Alexia hit her friend and smiled at the halfling.
What are you doing here?
She asked sweetly, hoping he wouldn't be frightened by the rest of the party. She just knew in her heart that Sindel was giving him the nastiest look. The halfling drew himself up and smiled.
I am Insel the thief. The clerics of this dump captured me and locked me up,
he explained and shoved his shackles into Alexia's face. Alexia frowned and looked the tiny man up and down.
Oh. We're not from Darkmoon, we're here to rid the Waterdeep of this place,
she said and touched the man's chains.
Would you be so kind as to remove these bondages?
Insel asked nicely. Alexia saw no point in refusing and beckoned for Meeks to do the job. Insel cringed as Meeks raised her pole arm and chopped the chains in half.
Thank you. May I join your team? I can prove myself useful in your quest,
he asked. Sindel spoke this time.
No. We already have 2 thieves and that's all we need. Thanks anyway, goodbye,
she urged, and although it was immoral to be that rude to a stranger, Sindel was right for refusing the halfling's aid. No one bothered to speak against her. Insel nodded and waved goodbye to the team hesitantly and then disappeared into the darkened halls of the catacombs. On leaving the prison cell, Prisma held up the party.
Wait, I hear something,
she said in a hushed whisper.
From over there,
she said and pointed to the opposite end of the room. It was dark and impossible to see what was lurking there. Alexia and Meeks stepped forward and a guard appeared from the gloom. The 2 fighters ran towards the man but they were beaten by a blue-white streak of lightning. The guard was hit and fell dead to the ground immediately. Alexia and Meeks turned to see Massage, his book open in one hand and the lightning bolt's remnants writhing about his fingers in the other.
Who was the quickest to react now, Sindel?
Massage purred, not even looking at the priestess behind him. Sindel laughed dryly.
Don't play me, boy,
she hissed.
Holy crap!
Meeks blurted, looking at the dead guard and then at Massage and back again.
Nice shot.
she said, and the drow grinned. She felt her face go red and she wasn't sure if it was out of jealousy or something else. Elixia tapped Meeks on the shoulder with her blade.
Alright, now that's enough. There are some barrels over here I want you to hack,
she said, and pulled Meeks past the guard's lifeless body. Nightshade mumbled and darted towards the side wall. She began inspecting it and touching it the way she had with the wall upstairs. Prisma followed Elixia and Meeks over by the 5 barrels and watched as both women hacked viciously at the containers.
What are those?
She asked as the contents of one of the barrels tumbled to the ground at her feet. Prisma bent and picked up one of the small green bags. Inside was a type of golden dust.
So, what are they?
Elixia asked. She came up beside the little drow lady and curiously peered over her shoulder. Prisma twitched her nose and furrowed her brow in thought.
They might be nothing at all, but something tells me they're little bags of magic dust,
she said, and stuck her finger into the fine dust, then brought it up to her nose. Meeks leaned on Elixia's shoulder and watched Prisma's every move.
I could have told you that. The real question is, what does it do?
She demanded impatiently. Prisma exhaled loudly in response and looked further into the room, trying to find some help on the subject.
Nightshade. Massage. Come here, I've found something.
She called into the darkness when the light of Izzy's torch revealed the whereabouts of her friends. Nightshade pulled herself reluctantly from the wall she was studying and followed Massage as he walked by. Prisma held out the small pouch in her hand as her teammates came close.
Look. I want to know what it does,
she said shortly and handed the dust to Nightshade.
To tell you the truth, Priz, I don't have a clue what it does. It doesn't look like any magic dust I've come across before,
Nightshade uttered as Izzy and her torch approached the small group. The conversation cut short and everyone watched Izzy join the crew. Her tight blue shirt looked even tighter in the torchlight.
Hi, what's going on here?
Izzy piped and tried to look over Massage's shoulder to catch a glimpse of what everyone was staring at. Massage pushed the little thief back, fearing her torch would burn his robes.
I know what it does,
he spoke, accepting the dust as Nightshade handed it over to him. The group lightened as Massage touched the golden substance with his ebony fingers and then pulled the pouch's drawstring.
It's stone to flesh dust. If for some reason one of us gets turned into stone, this dust will reverse the spell,
he explained matter-of-factly. Meeks smiled at Massage's intelligence and Massage averted his gaze. Nightshade slipped her backpack off of her shoulders and pulled it open.
Right on, I wonder if the whole temple is as useful as this,
she commented, taking the 3 bags of dust on the floor and the one from Massage's hand and placing them all in her pack.
I'm not sure if we're supposed to be taking anything. Aren't we here to tear this place apart?
Elixia spoke from beside Meeks. It really didn't make sense to her to pillage Darkmoon when they were supposed to be destroying its inhabitants instead. Izzy was the one to respond.
If we're to take this place down, why not take the things we want first?
She opted deviously, her rogue thief side finally breaking past her innocent exterior. The comment was acknowledged and the group turned to leave the far end of the room when Nightshade suddenly turned to the wall on the left and began feeling it. Everyone watched her and she didn't even seem to notice their presence. She took a while and Prisma abruptly took notice of Will and Sindle's absence.
Guys, where are Will and Sindle?
She asked and everyone turned to look around except Nightshade who continued to fondle the wall. The 2 clerics were at the entrance of the room and were talking, quietly, for once.
Ah!
Nightshade's triumphant gasp brought her friends back to the matter at hand.
I found a passageway,
she declared and pressed a small stone at the bottom left corner of the wall that triggered the entrance mechanism.
If it's a teleporter, find another guinea pig, all right.
Izzy whined and Prisma took hold of the girl's shoulders. As one, Meeks and Elixia turned and shouted,
Will, Sindle, get your butts over here. Nightshade's found another passageway.
The 2 clerics quit talking immediately and hurried over to the rest of the team. Massage peered into the darkness below and clutched his spellbook instinctively. Meeks and Elixia readied their weapons and grinned. Sindle crossed her arms and Will frowned. Prisma beckoned Nightshade near.
Izzy's got a torch, and Izzy pretty brave. I say we let her lead the way,
Prisma said devilishly and then turned to Nightshade.
What do you think, bud?
She asked her friend. Nightshade clasped her hands together and nodded slowly.
I think that's a pretty smart move, babe. Good thinking,
she said, and just as soon Izzy was launched into the darkness without much retort. When the familiar thump of Izzy hitting the bottom of the staircase sounded, accompanied by her usual whine of complaint, Meeks and Elixia charged down at full speed, tripping over one another in their excitement.
Are you all right?
Will asked as he and Sindle descended the stairs quickly. Both drew their longswords in caution. Massage was next, and then Prisma and Nightshade, grinning. At the bottom of the stairs, the only light present was that of the torch that Izzy miraculously, even after being chucked down a staircase, still held. The area was not very wide and turned off at the left, as well as straight ahead. Sindel and Will already went ahead, and Meeks and Elixia stared in awe at the gargantuan spider web blocking the entrance to the left side turn off.
That's a big web.
Meeks stuttered, knowing very well what made the large thing. Elixia brushed some hair from her face and sneezed.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I don't care to go in there. You know how I am about spiders.
She murmured and retreated behind Meeks. Meeks smiled proudly and raised her pole arm to cut down the sticky web.
Don't worry Elixia, I'll go in there for,
she began, but was cut off by another voice.
No. It's best you don't. Those giant spiders are really tricky and there's never only one around, I wouldn't want you getting jammed in there.
Massage said from behind, placing a hand on Meeks' shoulder. Meeks frowned and turned to face the wizard.
What do you mean no? I'll go if I want to. I've fought worse than spiders and so has Elixia.
She said sharply, not understanding her friend's concern. Massage removed his hand from the warrior's shoulder and stared at her for a moment. What on God's green earth will make this woman understand that she would be psycho to charge in there like she had charged into the lobby earlier this morning? He thought to himself.
It's true, you know, we have fought much worse.
Elixia said from the side, knowing that convincing Meeks was mission impossible.
There were 2 scrolls and a key in there.
Sindel's voice said as she exited the room ahead and headed towards the group. The warrior vs wizard staring contest ceased and Elixia bolted between the two to retrieve the objects the clerics had found.
A key? Gimme it.
Elixia said and snatched the copper thing from Sindel's hands. She completely ignored the scrolls seeing as she would not know how to use them anyway. Will came up beside her and motioned for Prisma and Nightshade to come closer. Nightshade and Prisma were sitting on the staircase and got up to join the gang. Izzy had followed Will and Sindel into the room where they had found the items and she came closer also.
One of these is a mage's spell,
Sindel said and threw the design scroll at Prisma and Massage. Nightshade and Izzy gathered around as Prisma unrolled the cracked parchment and read it contents,
Innuend, Culprazuo, Fias. Fireball spell.
She declared pointedly and handed it to Nightshade so she could place it in her backpack along with the dust bags.
The other one is a map,
Sindel said, the paper already open in her hands.
I don't know for what though, parts of the edges have been burnt.
She mumbled and shook her head. Will shrugged.
Well. Just keep it anyway, it's bound to come in handy.
He said and snatched it from Sindel's hands and tucked it beneath his heavy shirt. Sindel glowered at him and he merely stepped away and headed for the staircase. Will stopped before the large spider web and pointed in its general direction.
What's in there?
He asked curiously and leaned closer to attempt to have a peek through. Meeks came forward and went to say something, but then she drew back and pursed her lips.
Never mind,
she said and looked up at Massage who smiled warmly at her side.
It's best we don't go in there.
She finished and the group went back up the stairs and out of the passageway. On their way back to the very first room they had went into once coming down from the lobby, Elixia, after stopping to laugh hysterically at one of the guards she had killed, found a key on one of the corpse's belts. The key, Izzy noticed, matched the lock on the locked door in the very first room they had been in. Now the group stood before that door. Nightshade held the key to the lock and slipped it inside.
I want to go back upstairs, it's not so gross up there.
She whined suddenly, breaking her friend's concentration on what lied beyond the door. Sindel urged Nightshade impatiently.
I told you we shouldn't have listened to the wizard.
She grumbled. Nightshade opened the lock and the door creaked open. 2 armed guards came rushing out in a split second.
Bitchin'.
Meeks and Elixia cheered and the guards fell to their deaths moments later. The team followed a short corridor that led them to an intersection with a large opening in the floor and a lever to the side. Nightshade and Izzy cried simultaneously, "It's a pit trap!" and darted forward to pull the lever. Nightshade punched Izzy in the arm and got to the lever first. It closed the gap in the floor. Sindel went to walk on it and Nightshade held her back.
No, wait. Once we step on there, something will happen from around that corner and if we step back, that gap will open up again. So no chickening out once that something happens. Deal?
She said in one breath. There was a mutual agreement and the team moved up. A door directly in front of them opened and 4 guards came rushing at the team. It was crucial to keep from being overpowered, and Nightshade's warning rung in everyone's head. Hold spells on the part of Sindel and Will shot forward and targeted the 4 men. The spells held 2 men deep and all the guards were affected. Because of the greater number of people affected, the spell would dissipate soon. The guards had to be dealt with quickly. Prisma and Massage knew this and a lightning bolt zapped forward followed by a fireball in just seconds. Meeks and Elixia ran full speed and knocked the 4 guards from their motionless feet. The Dark Elf's spells finished off 3 soldiers and Meeks and Elixia shared the last.
Now you can go.
Nightshade breathed and the party stalked forwards. Izzy looked back and blinked.
The gaps opened up again.
She noticed and was answered by Will's call.
This lever probably shuts it up again,
he said and pulled the metal lever. As he thought, the pit closed. The winding corridor beyond led the crew to 4 separate chambers that composed the guards' barracks. In each barrack was a set of 4 to 6 guards and all were dispatched. Meeks and Elixia had minor wounds but hadn't noticed them until Will had pointed them out. A key was found, as well as a silver horn.
What does this do? Why the hell do they need a horn?
Prisma asked, holding the object in her hands but refraining from blowing into it. Massage shook his head.
I don't know, maybe it's to summon the other.
He stopped short when Prisma held up her finger.
No, it's magic,
she said and handed it to Massage offhandedly. The slender wizard looked at it and nodded then, after concluding that time would answer his questions, gave it over to Meeks who dropped it into her backpack. The team descended a short staircase and then another and found themselves before a large, dark, open room.
Izzy, torchlight. Now.
Sindel ordered the thief who happily lit the area ahead.
Well, we can go left of right,
Izzy said. Directly ahead was a wall, so left or right would have to do.
I say we stick to the walls, so right,
Elixia said, pointing her sword in that direction. There was a closed door blocking the way once the party crossed the room.
Damn,
Meeks uttered and then said,
wait no. I have.
She reached into her backpack and pulled out the key she had gotten from the guards' barracks.
A key.
She unlocked the door and was about to charge inside when Will pulled her back and pointed to Nightshade who was standing beside the wall to the left and grinning proudly.
I found another passageway,
she said shortly. The team checked the door, newly unlocked, and then dismissed it for later. They entered the circular room and Izzy darted to one side and emerged with 2 potions in her hands.
Look, a poison curing potion and a healing potion,
she said cheerily. Prisma's hand shot out and snatched the precious salves from the redhead.
Give me those. You'll probably break 'em,
she said and gave them to Nightshade so she could put them away. Elixia and Meeks had followed Massage to another wall and were mystified when he said,
the wall before us is a second-rate illusion.
The 2 women didn't quite know what to do and then followed Massage's example and stepped right through the wall. The rest of the team followed curiously and Massage led them into what seemed like a dungeon.
This looks and smells of prison block,
Sindel said and her words were muffled by her robe. She held it up to her nose so she wouldn't have to smell the air. They walked forward and on each side were jail cells. Will opened a few of them out of curiosity and found nothing but bones. Shh! Massage whispered and held out his arm to hold the rest of the team back.
There are clerics around that corner,
he said. At that moment, a loud voice said,
halt! Who goes there?
And 2 male clerics tore around the corner that Massage had pointed out. Squeezed in a hallway, the group of 8 didn't know whether to charge or back up or do something else. Both temple clerics cast hold spells at the party but Will and Sindel countered them with dispel spells. Meeks and Elixia went in blades leading the way and the clerics fought back with maces. The heavy weapons the temple clerics used were cumbersome and difficult to hold off because of their momentum, but Elixia and Meeks had a momentum of their own. They suddenly ducked, to the surprise of the clerics, and swooped low with their blades. When the clerics raised their maces to downstrike, the 2 women jumped to the side and yelled, spells! At that moment, even though the move had not been rehearsed, an ice storm and a fireball, coming from Massage and Prisma, flew by and caught the 2 temple clerics by surprise and sent them sprawling to the back wall.
Thank you!
Meeks and Elixia cried simultaneously and giggled childishly, finishing off the 2 clerics and stepping back. The team quickly joined them and for the very first time, everyone was smiling, even Sindel.
That was so amazing!
Prisma exclaimed, grasping Nightshade and hugging her excitedly.
Who knew we could work as a team?
Massage added, his crimson eyes shimmering as they fell upon Meeks.
Woohoo!
Elixia shouted, not caring if anyone heard.
This is only the beginning,
she said and danced about with Meeks.
Oh, that was bliss,
Sindel commented, patting Will's arm and watching the rest of the team chatter excitedly. Although it was only 2 dead temple clerics, everyone was high on excitement. They had gotten their very first taste of teamwork, of how powerful they all could be together, and everyone was nuts about it. The group's bond finally began to take hold. When everyone had settled enough to stop shouting and jumping about, they went around the corner where the temple clerics had been waiting and to their right was a closed door. Everyone got ready for another enthralling encounter but got no such thing. The door wasn't guarded, there was an empty chamber to the left and a darkened chamber to the right.
There's someone in here,
Prisma said. She was the first to step into the room. Izzy soon followed with her torch in her hand and expelled the darkness.
Oh!
Prisma and Izzy both gasped. Standing against the wall at the far end of the little cubicle was a drow elf. He was as dark as Prisma and Massage and looked frightened. He clutched a book to his chest and stared at the party. Massage strode into the room and up to his fellow dark elf. Massage smiled and the other man seemed to soothe a little.
My name is Massage Hanet. I'm from Menzoberranzan.
Massage said, his voice sounding dark in the echoing room. The other elf drew himself up but came a few inches short of Massage's height.
I am Sanral Dragonsphere. I am from Chedna Sod.
He said reluctantly, examining Massage and then the rest of the party. Prisma bounded forward and stood beside Massage.
I'm from Chedna Sod also, my name is Prisma Banger.
She said lightly and smiled wide. The rest of the party stood back and watched in silence. Sanral smiled and straightened his robes.
Banger? What are you doing up here?
He asked quickly. Prisma felt good about having found someone else from her homeland.
Everyone in this room has been chosen by the city of Waterdeep to take down this temple. Each of us were summoned from our own homes, we just got here today.
She explained. Sanral nodded.
I see. You might want to know what I'm doing here as well. As you might have noticed, this whole building is a work of the Drow. Once it was built, there was a cataclysm and some of us died. I was taken prisoner. I've been here for quite a few years, not in this cell. But about the temple, I've become a kind of slave.
He said sadly and bowed his head in shame. There was a momentary silence and then Massage pointed to the book Sanral clutched.
You are a mage?
He asked, raising an eyebrow. Sanral smiled again.
Of course. I was just about to graduate when I was asked to assist in the building of this temple.
He answered brightly and regained his composure.
And you are too, I believe.
Massage smirked.
Yes. I am a master of sorcerer, I've been teaching there for over a century.
Massage boasted. Behind him and amongst the party, Sindel rolled her eyes and uttered a loud HMPH. Prisma caught Sanral's gaze and the newcomer turned from Massage and faced her.
Prisma, perhaps you would like to introduce me to the rest of the people staring at me.
He proposed sharply and looked over Prisma's shoulders to the 6 group members. Prisma spun around and Sanral moved ahead to greet the strangers.
They can introduce themselves.
Prisma said. Izzy was the first to go.
My name's Izzy.
She giggled and waved the torch close to Sanral, nearly blinding the poor fellow.
I am Sindel and this is Will.
Sindel said next, making sure to put the newcomer in his place with one of her yes, that's right, I am imposing so don't play me looks. Will smiled and Sanral nodded curtly. Nightshade stood beside the 2 clerics and didn't really speak until Sanral stood directly before her.
Nightshade, my name is Nightshade.
She uttered, fingering the true-seeing amulet around her neck. Last but not least Sanral came to the 2 leaders.
Hey, I'm Meeks.
Meeks gushed and then paused for a second and said,
You didn't happen to see that cloud carving upstairs, did you? It really blew.
She began but stopped short when Sanral's confused expression told her that he had no clue what she was talking about. A blank stare sufficed for Sanral's greeting of Meeks, and a reserved smile appeared on the dark elf's lips when his gaze fell upon Elixia.
And who might you be?
He asked softly and pulled back the hood of his dark robes to reveal his long, stark white hair that much resembled Massage's in length and texture. Elixia felt herself blush and suddenly regretted teasing Meeks about Massage.
Hello. I'm Elixia, I'm Meeks and I lead this party.
She stuttered, images of all the payback she was going to receive from Meeks piling into her head. Sanral took Elixia's hand and kissed it.
Pleased to make your acquaintance, my lady.
He said grandly. Elixia squealed and looked over at Meeks. Her pal smiled and her eyes seemed to say, oh man, I am going to get you so bad.
Why yes.
Elixia managed, not quite able to keep her eyes off the new dark elf, so maybe they're not all cold like Massage, she thought to herself as she looked over at the wizard in question who was engaged in an evil stare contest with Sindel. Prisma came up behind Sanral and he turned to her.
So, would you like to join the crew? We can always use more magic, and you seem to be accepted by our leaders.
Prisma asked, giving Elixia the eye. There was a general uneasy shift on the part of a few party members. Can you guess who? And a slight hesitation from Sanral, but then,
that would be great, maybe at last I will be able to exact some revenge on my captors.
He declared with a smile. Sindel smacked her hand on her forehead and fell back against Will.
Isn't Massage enough?
She moaned so that only the people closest to her could hear.
Now I have 2 wizards to prove I'm better than.
End of chapter. Chapter and Chapter 4. Chapter 4. Doubt set in. After a quick survey of the area, the team figured that the only place left to go was the closed door they had passed before Nightshade had taken them into the secret passageway leading to the dungeons. Once inside a set of doors, the party had heard voices, many voices. So, not quite ready to run in and attack whomever the voices belonged to, the group decided to go back to the deserted dungeons and rest.
At last.
Meeks said after a long sigh and pulled the food package she had found earlier and put away.
I'm so hungry.
She began to eat greedily and the rest of the group tried not to stare. They were all gathered inside the large room opposite of where Sanral had been found, everyone gathered around their backpacks which they had thrown in the middle. Sindel brushed a piece of bread from her robes with her hand and frowned at Meeks.
Sensible bites, Meeks, sensible bites.
She scolded but the famished warrior heard nothing. She turned to Will, Elixia and Sanral who sat beside her.
Anyway, I think this is all going rather well, don't you all think?
She commented.
The whole temple raiding thing, I mean.
She added when she got a few confused glances. Will watched as Elixia leaned over Sindel to tear a piece of food out of Meek's hand.
Yes, I think so too, Sindel. I just hope things don't get much more complicated, but I know that's wishful thinking.
He said wisely. Sindel nodded and rushed Elixia off of her.
I think Sindel and Will should steal the 2 dead clerics' robes and put them on.
Nightshade said, sitting in front of Will, Sindel, Elixia, and Sanral. Will cocked his head to the side.
Why do you say that?
He asked. Beside him, Sindel summoned water in goblets from her god and set them down before her friends. Nightshade smiled as she took her cup and drank the cold liquid down quickly, then offered some to Prisma who sat beside her.
Well, obviously, Will, you two would look just a little less suspicious. You know, if temple clerics see us all run by quickly, maybe they'll think less of us if they catch a glimpse of their own clerical cloth.
She explained, and now she held almost everyone's attention. Will nodded and Sindel sneered.
You want me to renounce Demora?
Sindel roared and attempted to get up, but Will roughly pulled her back down. Nightshade held up her hands defensively.
No. You're not renouncing your god, you're just putting on a different robe. Just think about it, Sindel, what I propose makes sense.
She said calmly. Sindel stared straight ahead and looked to be making sense of it in her mind.
I'll do it.
Will opted suddenly and Nightshade smiled at him approvingly. Sindel glared at her partner.
Oh sure, go ahead and betray your Christian god, you pansy.
She hissed at Will. Will turned to face her with a stern expression.
You listen here, priestess, do you not know how to tell right from wrong? Or how to know what's wise and what's not? Does anything unselfish ever go through that thick skull of yours?
He shot back and looked her straight in the eye. Sindel was momentarily shocked and debated with herself if she should give in or show how headstrong she was in refuse. There was a long silence and then Sindel cleared her throat.
The robes are pretty. I suppose I could try them on.
She admitted weakly, and there was a general smile from the whole group as, for once, Sindel had backed down. They all got up and headed out of the room and over to where the dead clerics lay. A little further to the side, Meeks finished her lunch and looked up to see some of her friends leave the room.
Hun? Da well.
She shrugged and rummaged through her backpack for more food.
Water.
Came a smooth voice from the side. Meeks looked over to see Massage sit down by her side with 2 goblets of Sindel's, or should I say Demora's, water.
Yeah sure, thanks.
She said and took a cup from Massage and chugged it down. The wizard chuckled.
You gonna eat the cup too?
He asked, not quite sure if he meant it as a joke or not. Meeks put the goblet down and scowled at Massage.
Did you just insult me?
She said huskily. She might not be the quickest but she could understand when she was being insulted, no matter how subtle the hint was. For a moment, Massage didn't know what to respond, then he simply smiled.
Well, you see, the thing is, I don't know myself.
He said matter-of-factly and drank from his own cup.
You just ate so much. I figured the goblet would be like some sort of dessert.
He said it nonchalantly but watched Meek's reaction with the corner of his eye. Meek's jaw dropped and she cried out and got to her feet in a rush.
You are so mean.
She said and watched as Massage got up to face her. The dark elven wizard smiled maliciously.
I can't lie to you. I am mean. But not to everyone.
He said. Fearing a fight with this particular mage, Meeks looked about the room for assistance and found no one but Izzy sleeping in a corner.
Thanks, Izzy, I'll remember that when you're in need of help.
Meeks mumbled unhappily to the sleeping thief.
Help? Now why on earth would you be in need of help?
Massage purred, crossing his arms over his chest. Meeks looked at him then and readied herself to say something offending. But she couldn't get herself to say it. Sure, he was mean, and cold, and a bit arrogant. But still, there was something about him that Meeks couldn't help but like.
Well, aren't you going to come up with a snappy comeback?
Massage asked again, raising an eyebrow. Meeks looked him up and down. He was taller than she and less built, and he was obviously slender beneath his purple velvet robe. His facial features were lean and sharp, and his thick, white shoulder-length hair was an amazing contrast to his ebony skin. Meeks opened her mouth to speak her retort but failed when an unreadable glint in Massage's eyes caused both of them to smile.
Are you guys fighting?
Came Izzy's sleepy voice from behind the wizard and the warrior. Meeks and Massage turned to face the one who interrupted their silence.
No, Izzy. We're not fighting, go back to sleep and don't worry about it.
Meeks said sharply, realizing she was angry about the interruption but not figuring why. Izzy blinked a few times and cast skeptical glances at her teammates.
Well, I can't now, you guys woke me up.
She said and pulled herself to her feet heavily.
So, what were you two talking about?
She asked, walking across the room to join the two others. Massage exhaled loudly and blew a strand of hair that had fallen in his face.
Quite frankly, Izzy, none of your business.
He snapped, drawing a frown from the gentle thief and a smile from Meeks. Izzy shrugged and then nodded her understanding.
All right. Anyone got any food?
She asked, drastically changing the subject. She made a move for the team's gathered backpacks in the center of the room and rummaged through one of them carelessly.
Hey! Get out of my stuff, you little spore!
Nightshade yelped, striding into the room followed by Prisma, Will, Sindel, Elixia and Sanral. Izzy jumped nervously away from Nightshade's pack as the older thief came at her in a rush. Sindel and Will were both adorned with, not their usual clerical robes, but the thick and flowing robes of the clergy of Temple Darkmoon. Massage and Meeks joined their team.
Wow, those look really nice on you too.
Meeks complimented the two clerics and reached out to feel the soft cloth of Sindel's royal blue robe. Both Will and Sindel had also taken the dead cleric's plate mail and wore them over the robes, the whole outfit looking rather fitting on the two godlings.
It's comfortable too.
Will commented thoughtfully, making final adjustments to the sleeves. Meeks was confused. So?
Why exactly are you guys wearing those?
She asked. When Nightshade had hatched the plan, Meeks had been eating and hadn't heard a thing. Neither had Izzy, but she chose not to speak up on the count of she wasn't in the mood to accept the verbal bashing she would definitely be receiving from Prisma and Nightshade. Already, Sanral began to show his involvement with the group.
They put them on to look less suspicious, Meeks.
He explained simply. Meeks wasn't sure she understood.
Doesn't a group of 9 people running around and killing everyone look suspicious? Even if 2 of those people are wearing Darkmoon's robes?
She asked. Massage moved by her side and cleared his throat.
Meeks, the more help we can get, the better. If Will and Sindel wear Darkmoon's robes, they'll have an easier time getting around to certain places where it would be harder for the rest of us to go.
He repeated calmly and it made sense in Meek's mind. Elixia pushed past Sanral and pulled her sword from its sheath.
So, let's get out of here and get on with it.
She said, her impatience growing visibly. Meeks strode up to her side and the two clerics joined, followed by Nightshade and Prisma, Massage, and Sanral, and finally Izzy. They quickly and quietly headed out of the dungeons and back to the room where they had heard the many voices. Gathered before the closed door, they all pulled themselves together for an attack that would be inevitable.
I hear about 4, maybe 5 voices.
Elixia declared, her ear up against the cold steel door. Behind her, the party was quiet. Meeks leaned on her polearm and then couldn't resist to join Elixia, ear against the door.
Oh, there's more.
She whispered.
Voices?
Elixia asked, her eyes darting around the room. Meeks shook her head.
No. There's another sound besides voices. I think. There's something else.
She finished pointlessly, giving no help at all as to what might be beyond the door. Elixia sniffed and took a deep breath.
We'll never know until we see for ourselves,
she concluded and took hold of the side lever that opened the door.
Get ready, guys.
She said. Beside her, Meeks took on attack stance. Behind her, Elixia could hear spell books being leafed through, as well and weapons brushing leather and stone. She closed her clear blue eyes and pulled the lever. There were alarmed cries from within the room and the sound of running. Elixia and Meeks meant to charge in but quickly saw what the other sounds were coming from. A group of about 30 undead warriors came at them from both sides and the leaders wisely stepped back. The skeletons came to the door but luckily, only 2 warriors fit to fight comfortably within the doorway so Meeks and Elixia were able to hold them from coming forwards and out of the chamber they were in. Behind both skeletons were 2 more, and way back in the room, clerics could be seen pacing about. Behind the 2 leaders, Will looked endlessly for a way to get in and fight.
What the hell is this temple doing? A normal temple does not need an undead army.
He yelled over the clang of weaponry ahead. Sindel bore a determined expression.
Perhaps Kelvin was right, this place is hell.
She summoned mystical powers and cast a hold spell.
Damn it. I hate this. Our spells do nothing.
She cried in fury as her spell dissipated into nothingness against the undead creatures.
Can't we use magic?
Nightshade asked, coming up behind Massage, Prisma, and Sanral and tugging on the mage's sleeves like a child. Massage nervously tightened his grip on his sword.
No, Nightshade, it's completely useless. We just have to wait here and take turns up at the front.
he said desolately. Nightshade's features darkened and she looked at Sanral and Prisma for a second opinion, but both shook their heads at her. She took a deep breath and tried again. Just in case,
are you sure?
She asked her friends, her voice cracking. The noise up ahead was extreme and for all she could see, Meeks and Elixia were still fighting. Sanral whirled and grabbed Nightshade's shoulders.
Just grab your sword and wait, Queen Mab,
he said, hoping the thief would settle down so that he wouldn't lose his cool along with her. Nightshade swallowed thickly and drew up her short sword before her and shifted her weight from one foot to the other anxiously. In quick time, Meeks and Elixia tore away from the doorway and ran to the back of the team. They were panting and they were wounded, not severely, but they were wounded. Sindel and Will jumped ahead, all too happy to get a piece of the fight for themselves, and were treated by the arrival of two clerics standing behind the undead warriors that fought in the doorway. At the sight of flesh, the three mages reacted all at once. Prisma let loose a lightning bolt, Massage a volley of magical missiles and Sanral a fireball. Ultimately, the clerics were defeated before they could get off one spell. Nightshade, who was also a mage, would have also cast a spell if she wasn't so preoccupied with the arrival of the two wounded leaders.
Are you alright? Oh my god, is there something I can do?
She gushed, shaking in anxiety. She dropped her sword and began to put her hands over the two warriors' wounds to stop the bleeding.
Don't worry about it, just wait until Will and Sindel come back here, they'll do the work,
Elixia said, picking up Nightshade's sword and handing it to her. Izzy, who had kept quiet until then, strode up and examined Meeks and Elixia. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a healing salve.
No Izzy, don't waste it,
Meeks and Elixia said as one. Izzy pulled back.
Why not? That's what it's for, isn't it?
She objected, opening the little glass bottle. Meeks roughly took it from the girl and put it back into her bag.
I said, don't waste it,
she repeated seriously. Izzy bowed her head and put the bottle away after closing it up again. Sanral and Massage had only the time to glimpse back at the leaders when Sindel and Wool split and ran to the back of the team to heal the leaders. It was time for the wizards to fight. The members with the least martial inclination in the whole team felt as though they were going to die.
I was never very good with a sword,
Sanral whined, holding the hilt of his long sword with both hands and swinging it as though it was a club. Beside him, Massage arched his stomach to dodge a wide swing that would most likely have sliced him in half.
It looks so much easier when you watch other people do it, doesn't it?
He gasped, his sense of humor still present even though he was scared to death. Prisma and Nightshade frowned at the two wizards' progress. Not one undead warrior had fallen to either of their blades since they began fighting. They waited a little longer and when Sanral almost got his head chopped off, Prisma decided to get the mages out of there.
Move. Let's get this over with,
she hollered and she and Nightshade pushed past Massage and Sanral. Happily, the two dark elves went behind the two women and waited for more clerics to annihilate. At the back of the crew, Sindel and Wool were busy healing Meeks and Elixia. Izzy helped the two clerics by doing their bidding.
I wanna go back up there and fight, Elixia,
Meeks said in an impatient tone. Elixia held herself up with her sword.
Me too, hurry up Will.
She rushed as Wool busied away at healing the slash on her side. Elixia smiled and her eyes flared.
Did you see Sanral and Massage up there? They blew.
She chuckled, and then regretted the giggle as a pain in her healing side made her cringe. The sound of incantations entered the air and the leaders watched as three clerics arrived in the doorway to fight.
Clerics, I wanna go,
Meeks yelped but didn't attempt to take her wounded arm from Sindel's healing grip that felt more like death grip. Prisma's blade took the life from a female cleric that came up to fight. She smiled and prepared for a replacement skeleton warrior to take the girl's place. Nightshade raised her sword to parry a male cleric's mace downswing and then, for no apparent reason, the man crumbled to her feet along with the other cleric behind him. She whirled to see what had happened.
What, or should I say, who was that?
She yelled, the shock of battle screwed tightly within her. Both Massage and Sanral grinned and Nightshade understood. The army of undeads grew smaller, and the 5 clerics had been destroyed. When Prisma heard no sound coming from the room ahead, she decided to go in and have a look for herself. She looked around and found not a living, or dead, soul.
We did it guys. Come in here,
she said cheerily and walked up to a pile of items in the back of the room.
Oh, stuff,
Nightshade cried and dropped to her knees to look through the pile. Izzy came in and joined Prisma and Nightshade in their rummaging. Meeks and Elixia were almost fully healed and entered the room a little disappointed to have missed so much of the battle, but genuinely happy that it was over. Undead warriors were a different kind of opponent altogether, and they were not the most pleasant to deal with.
You doing all right?
Massage asked Meeks and put a hand on her shoulder.
Yep,
she said and nodded, staring straight ahead at what the thieves and Prisma were finding in the pile of items.
You can't fight worth crap,
she added, and Massage threw up his arms in defeat. Elixia patted her healed side, and Sanral appeared beside her and smiled warmly.
You fight really well, Elixia. It's embarrassing when I have to go up afterwards,
he said. Elixia caught Meek's gaze, and Meek's devious grin revealed her thoughts quite clearly.
Thank you, Sanral, that's very nice,
Elixia said almost absent-mindedly. Then she said,
you did really well too.
Sanral frowned because he knew he had done awful and realized that Elixia wasn't listening to him at all. She was busy watching Meeks make faces at her.
Well,
Nightshade said, turning to face the team with a bundle of things in her arms.
I found a sword.
She pulled every item from her hands as she enumerated them.
An axe, some food, 2 cleric scrolls, a helmet with funny-looking horns, and some bracers,
she said contentedly. Elixia and Meeks stole forward and lunged for the axe and the sword. Sindel and Wool shoved past each other to get to the 2 cleric scrolls, and Prisma, Sanral, and Massage all ran for the bracers. After the commotion, Nightshade remained standing with food and the horned helmet in her hands.
Isn't anyone going to take this hat? Look how ugly it is, there's gotta be some.
She stopped in mid-sentence and fitted the helmet atop Izzy's head.
There, that's rather suiting.
She chuckled and Prisma squealed from ahead. Izzy grimaced and tore the thing off.
That's mean. I don't want to wear it. You wear it.
She yelped suddenly and put the helmet on Nightshade's head. The older thief began to take it off when Sanral spoke up.
Oh, don't take it off, it looks nice on you, Queen Mab,
he said with a light chuckle and awaited Nightshade's imminent, nasty reply.
Oh, does it? Looks like I found me a hat.
Nightshade hooped, fitting the horned helmet comfortably atop her head. She knew very well the hat looked awful, but deep inside the humor of it all soothed the air around the group. She strode forward and the team began to get ready to leave.
Wait, I see something over there,
Elixia cried, running towards the far side wall. Meeks ran after her and they could be seen bending over an alcove in the wall. Prisma, who had won the battle for the bracers and was fitting them at that moment, smiled at Nightshade's new hat.
Nice. Now you look just about stupid enough to give Izzy some competition,
she commented, and Nightshade shoved her in response. Sanral brushed past the 2 and Nightshade decided to ask him a question.
Sanral, why do you call me Queen Mab?
She inquired, recalling he had done it twice now. The dark elf paused and then smiled.
Because you look just like a character in a story my mother used to tell me when I was a child. The character's name was Queen Mab,
he explained simply, feuding on his hood. Nightshade frowned and Prisma brightened.
I know that story. My mother told me it too,
she said happily and took Nightshade's arm and pulled her close to look at her carefully.
And you do look like Queen Mab. That's so amazing, I would never have made the connection if Sanral wouldn't have mentioned it,
she concluded. Nightshade put on an odd expression.
Yes,
she said slowly and averted her attention from the 2 drow staring at her like children who think they've seen the Easter Bunny.
What are they talking about?
Sindel said in a hushed voice. She leaned against the wall and yawned. Wool leaned beside her and shrugged.
Don't have a clue. They're in their own world now, Sindel,
he said, Sindel's yawn causing him to mimic her. Wool brushed off his new deep red clerical robes.
You know what?
he said, turning his head to look at his fellow cleric.
What?
Sindel snapped, a little too sharply. Wool ignored the edge in her voice and continued.
I'm really confused. Why would this temple need an entire army of undead warriors? It's not like they've got people coming here to ruin them every week,
he remarked. Sindel sighed and turned her head to look at Will.
I don't know. You know what really confuses me?
She paused but not long enough for Will to give an answer.
If these clerics are clerics, then who or what do they worship? We've been through a good part of the temple, at least I think, and I've not seen any indication of what these people believe in. No statues, no symbols.
She meant to continue but Will held up a finger and butt her off.
No, we've seen symbols. Remember the one on the door upstairs? And what about the ones on the cloak of these robes?
He said. Sindel gave him a cold stare for proving her wrong and then spoke up.
The symbol on the door upstairs was a big D, it probably stands for Darkmoon. And the ones on our cloaks? I just can't say. I mean, they can't possibly believe in a dragon,
she figured. Indeed, the symbol on the clerical robes was a dragon, curled into a circle, quite a lovely thing to look at. Will shook his head and closed his eyes.
I don't really care. I'm just getting tired,
he declared and looked Sindel up and down. Sindel actually smiled and nodded her agreement.
I found a key,
Elixia cheered, running up ahead of Meeks and holding up a dark key. She ran up to Sanral, Nightshade and Prisma and handed them the key.
What door do you think it's for?
She asked curiously. Prisma examined it and then gave it to Nightshade.
I don't know, but it's probably for a door down here,
she pretty safely guessed. Behind Elixia, Meeks frowned.
If that's so, then I don't want to go yet. I'm getting sick of fighting in the dark. I say we go back to the lobby and up the opposite stairs, where it was bright. I know there's probably going to be more clerics there, but who cares? The lack of light is giving me a monstrous headache.
She confessed. She looked around at the rest of the party and everyone was staring at her as if to say, well, we didn't see that one coming. Sindel and Will both smiled.
Good, I agree with Meeks.
Will said and Sindel backed him up with a nod.
But we're not done down here.
Izzy whined concernedly. Meeks nodded but didn't let up.
I know, Izzy. But I don't know when the headache will leave, and if I can't fight properly by Alexia's side then I'm useless and I don't like that. So I say, again, that we go back upstairs.
She pressed and looked at everyone in turn.
Alexia? What do you think?
She asked her best friend and Alexia made a dismissive gesture.
Whatever, as long as we come back down here.
She said. Nightshade, Prisma, and Sanral all gave in with a resigned nods, but Massage looked relenting. Meeks figured this would happen and opened her mouth to say something, but Sindel was quicker.
Oh, just give up, you arrogant wizard.
She barked at the dark elf. Meeks ignored the rude comment and stepped up before Massage.
Please, Massage. The team won't go if you don't go.
She said, and Sindel hissed between her teeth.
Speak for yourself.
Meeks pretended not to hear and put the blade of her pole arm to Massage's chest.
If you don't agree, I'll kill you.
She warned, and the wizard began to smile.
I would like to see you try.
He purred at Meeks. Meeks didn't really have the heart or the guts to kill Massage, but her barbaric side told her it was best to threaten him.
This is silly. This is a simple decision. Now please, Massage, do you follow?
She asked and never left the slender wizard's crimson eyes. Massage cocked his head to one side and pretended to consider. He knew he was going to follow, and there was no question about it, but he found it so pleasant to tease Meeks.
Let's go.
He said finally, and Meeks lowered her blade with a relieved sigh. Alexia strode up to the front of the crew and Meeks moved to follow, but she was held back. Massage had caught her arm and said softly,
You owe me one.
And then pointed a finger at her and let her go. End of chapter. Chapter end.